Was it here that someone asked for a fighting story? Magical powers, crazy monsters, and an overpowered protagonist. Then take this, today I won't even give you any spoilers, okay? So I don't ruin the experience. Just don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and leave lots of comments, alright? So let's go, gang. This is the end. This is the final attack. I will end your life, and with it, all of humankind. When you fall, Leon Klei, the great hero, everything will be mine. Take it all. My great final attack, Leon. No, I will never lose. I cannot fall to this world and leave it in your hands. Great Demon King Belfar, today you shall meet your end. I will concentrate all my mana to defeat you in a single strike. Advance, great ice crystals of the north. Pierce this wicked demon. No, no, no. How did this attack pierce me? Impossible. Leon Klei, look at me closely. Do not think this is the end. No, Belfar. Your threats no longer scare me, for I have finally defeated you. And so our story begins with peace returning to the world, after the great mage Leon Klei defeated the great demon Belfar. That's how he wanted to imagine it. So let's go to an orphanage. There, the children quickly ran to their big brother, and he also noticed them rushing toward him, especially a little girl holding a teddy bear in her hands. And she was very worried about her brother. After all, many rumors had spread across the world, but he told her everything was fine while gently patting her head. Heading to the royal castle, the high nobility awaited Leon's return. Our protagonist knelt down thanking Prince Shark. In the background, a voice said it had been a long time since she last heard his voice. It was Princess Sarah, and she looked at the great hero with dazzling eyes. Leon also showed respect by kissing her hand. Shark even joked that when Sarah heard the great hero was coming, she quickly got ready. But changing the subject, Leon asked, "Why are you here today?" And the royal family informed him that there was still a cave full of monsters he needed to defeat. That shocked Leon. After all, he had already defeated the great demon king. Shark didn't understand either, but after investigating the cave, he reported it was overflowing with those monsters, so Leon needed to go as well. But the important part was that, since they were sending Leon, they knew he would return safely and eliminate all the enemies. After all, he was the same one who defeated the demon king, so he was capable of anything, and Leon wanted to do it. After all, the orphanage needed him. He needed to fight for the future, and for the children's home. So he simply bowed in respect and said he would take on the mission. He even said that once the investigation was over and he returned, he could marry the great Princess Sarah, and she became completely flustered, while the protagonist liked the idea. After all, marrying a princess seemed like a hero's path. Then everyone in the room started laughing loudly, except for Prince Shark, who gave a sinister chuckle, and the king just informed them that his son would take Leon to the cave the next day. So let's move to the next day. In a carriage, Shark arrived there along with 2 other guards and was happy to work with the great hero of the nation. Leon said the same, that it was a great honor to work with the prince, and they greeted each other. Then they headed toward a large cave nearby, and the prince pointed inside. Leon said to proceed with caution. They shouldn't enter recklessly. And inside there was truly a dark aura, with miasma drifting everywhere, and the protagonist felt something very strange within. Then he told the prince to be careful because something was approaching, but at that moment the hero's chest was pierced by a sword. That same sword was coated in poison strong enough to make him fall to his knees. Then he turned and asked what the prince was planning to do. Shark said they were executing him. After all, he wanted to be the next king, and Leon cursed him. After all, he had no political interest whatsoever. He only wanted to protect the children of the future. And Shark started laughing, louder and louder, echoing throughout the cave. He threw an item saying that the children were really very important to the great hero, and that item was the same teddy bear that the little girl was holding at the beginning. Shark said he had set fire to that orphanage the previous night, meaning he had destroyed the last thing the great hero cared about in this world, and he even stepped on the teddy bear with an evil look, asking what else Leon had left to keep him tied to this world. And the protagonist was completely horrified upon hearing it all. Then he screamed, cursing the prince with many indecent words. However, his body was immobilized by the poison, and the prince kicked him into a pit, thanking the world's great hero for his service as he watched him fall into the abyss. And the protagonist just stared at the man with pure hatred in his eyes. But Leon began to hear the sound of water, then looked up and awoke again. It seemed he had not yet succumbed. He didn't understand how, but he was still alive, completely fine, inside a pool of water, and he remembered the face of that cursed prince, once again filled with rage, because he would never ever forgive him. Then he started climbing out of the pool. First, I need to find a way out of this cave to crush that despicable being. But he was startled because an aura was approaching. It was a monster with a very dark energy, one he didn't recognize. So he began to conjure a fireball, then he hurled it at the beast, causing an explosion and shaking the cave. The protagonist wasn't in the mood for words. He faced that monster with deep resentment, and something was appearing before him, a strange aura. He didn't understand what the screen in front of him was, but it said he needed to defeat 1 million enemies. He even tried touching the thing, thinking it was some kind of ancient magic, but there was no time to waste because another monster appeared behind him, and another fireball struck its face. The system counter went up to 2. It seemed the numbers increased whenever he defeated one of those hellish monsters, but he simply ignored the thing's existence because he needed to find a way out. And not many meters ahead, he found several bodies. They all seemed to be heroes. All of them were people who had disappeared from the kingdom. Leon knelt in respect before everyone who had fallen in that cave. He got angry again because all of this must have been done by that cursed prince. And while he was searching, an entire day passed as he kept fighting and defeating many enemies he had never seen before. A whole year went by and still he could not find the exit. Many things happened during the battles. He was even bitten by a beast, but his anger and thirst for revenge against that prince never faded. Then after another long period, he ended up defeating thousands of monsters. He even learned new spells with grand effects. He didn't understand where this power was coming from, but he needed it to defeat his enemies out there. Then 10 years passed in this universe. Leon no longer had that spark in his eyes, and he was now surrounded by dark magic. And finally, he reached the mark of 1 million defeated enemies. The system congratulated him because he had completed the great secret mission, and a voice appeared in the protagonist's head asking him to defeat a certain someone. Then a light opened in front of him. It was a gigantic golden door filled with divine magic. The light was so bright that our protagonist could barely see. He wondered what the hell was going on. Then he was thrown once again into a pool of water, and slowly began to open his eyes, staring at his reflection and asking what had happened. Then he turned around and saw a large building right there, having no idea where he was at that moment, but a voice teased that he was still conscious and called him Kuro, saying it was going to beat him up even more. The protagonist was completely lost, asking who they were and who Kuro was, but the red-haired boy in front got angry, thinking he was pretending to be stupid. Then he grabbed the protagonist's head and pushed it underwater, saying he should sleep a little longer. Leon didn't understand anything, but now his eyes were sharp, and underwater he used his attribute to increase his strength, completely exploding that small fountain and sending everyone flying, including the redhead. And the redhead wondered what was happening, how that boy was so powerful, and how he had such a sharp gaze. But the redhead didn't react, instead calling his companions to just run away from there. A voice echoed in his mind, saying it was surprised he could use so much power even while being suppressed, and a small purple orb appeared beside him and simply flew away, telling him to follow. And the protagonist went after it even though he found it extremely suspicious, but it told him they were now on the right path, and a great flash of light appeared before him, and a loli came out of that light. Why is it always a loli? That girl hugged the great hero Leon, saying they had finally met, but he had no idea what that thing was, simply lifting her by the shoulders. And the loli apologized, saying her name was Luna, a messenger of the gods. It was quite simple to explain, though maybe a little strange. She was a guide for the dead, and the protagonist was completely shocked to hear that. That was because Leon had crossed to the other side, and thanks to the power of the goddesses, he had come to a completely different world. And clearly our boy was completely shocked and horrified to hear all of this, and Luna apologized. It might have been too confusing and rushed to explain it that way, but one thing the protagonist didn't understand was why this god had sent him to a new world. And as she was about to explain, a great pillar appeared beside them, and all that power completely stunned the protagonist because a gigantic gate appeared next to them. Luna thanked them, saying it was the most perfect timing, and extended her hand to our protagonist. And well, having no idea, he simply accepted it. And upon crossing that gigantic gate, his mouth fell open because he knew this place, he knew the scenery, and he also knew that monster as it was a subordinate of the great demon king Belfar. It was a formidable enemy that had an extremely powerful magical barrier. Originally, it had taken 3 days to defeat it in the original world, and Luna told him that if he used that magic, this would be easy, and he remembered the dark attribute he had gained in that cave. Meanwhile, that gigantic dinosaur was charging toward our boy. At that moment, everything around the protagonist turned into darkness with his new power. He raised his hands, and that power sent shivers down the monster's spine. He used the magic of the depravity of blessings, and that power shield was completely shattered. After breaking that barrier, he used his power directly on the ground. He raised his hands to manipulate all that dark aura, and then black, razor-sharp claws pierced the dinosaur, and the monster that had taken him 3 days to defeat in his former life was now defeated in less than 30 seconds. Luna jumped for joy, celebrating, and the protagonist realized that this magic was extremely powerful. He never expected to defeat a monster of this level with so little effort, and it was just as Luna expected after they came out of the gate, and she kept smiling happily. But Leon looked at her, saying she was hiding a lot, yet he understood one thing, that the Demon King was probably coming to this world. That was exactly what Luna wanted to tell him, because that gate was the Demon King's doing, and the world they were in could easily be destroyed by the Demon King's monsters, and that was why Luna was guiding our protagonist in this new world. But he was still doubtful about one thing, what was Belfar, until he noticed, not far from there, a kind of flag on a mast, and he remembered the same symbol he had seen on Shark's hand. He wondered if by any chance that bastard was also in this world, and then began trembling with rage as Luna noticed it, but she also saw someone approaching and disappeared completely under a cloak of darkness. and footsteps were heard right behind, and a person called out to our protagonist asking if he had a moment. And as she looked around, she asked if by any chance a gate had appeared nearby. Luna spoke into the protagonist's mind, telling him to say he hadn't seen anything and to play dumb. That way he answered no, and the girl found it strange that she had felt something coming there but ended up noticing who our protagonist was, and asked if by any chance he was that boy whom the delinquents were always bothering. He just bowed, asking for forgiveness. She tried to stop them but couldn't do it, and our big guy liked that she was very sincere in her opinions. She seemed to be a good girl. Anyway, when there was no gate seen, they should return to the dormitory. Luna also liked that girl a lot because she could feel a gate coming from there, and besides, she was very beautiful, so she was in love with her. She could develop into a secondary character just like it happened in the animes. That way, let's go to the students' dormitory, and in the protagonist's room there were several little notes saying for him to go and fight. And when he looked around, it seemed that the idiots had done that. Now he understood why that girl said she tried to stop the bullies but couldn't. And inside the room, Luna was complaining about who would have the audacity to write such vulgar words outside the room. And the protagonist asked who was this boy called Kuro, and while he sat on the bed, he also asked what was happening with that school. After all, the flag that was outside was exactly the same symbol that was on Shark, but Luna didn't know how to answer that. After all, she wasn't an omnipotent or omniscient being. Actually, she just received superficial information to be able to guide our protagonist in this story. And our big guy knew he had to investigate better about all that, but if that school was involved with something from Shark, he wouldn't let him go so freely. Right the next morning, he went to get a little pair of scissors in front of the mirror, and Luna praised that he really had good skills. Initially, the protagonist would act as the original Kuro and then left the dormitory to go to the classroom. Everyone was watching because his style had changed a lot with just that haircut, and few things went through our protagonist's mind while he was in class. Many years ago, those special gates started to appear in the world. At that same time, people with powers were also created, and from that they fought against the monsters from those portals. Inside them they discovered several extremely valuable artifacts and relics. The people who entered the portals were called Seekers, and now he was attending the Academy of the Sacred Empire to become a Seeker. Our boys started staring outside the classroom. There was Izumi training, the president of the student council, and she seemed to be extremely good with magic. Then in the corridor, he still needed to investigate more about that school until he was approached by a person who was that same delinquent from yesterday, along with two pretty ugly comrades. He was saying that he was going to bully our protagonist a lot, but Leon didn't quite understand what he meant by that, and the guy got even angrier because Kuro was pretending to be stupid and said that he was becoming quite arrogant while right behind the president of the council was appearing. The delinquent just started forming an earth magic in his hands, but Izumi pointed her hand saying that he should stop. However, he didn't stop for a moment and summoned the stone hammer. The protagonist just showed that this guy was very silly. That way he used his darkness attribute, and while that attack was coming in his direction, he used the devouring shadows to absorb all that attack. And that huge boulder started to be completely absorbed into the shadows and then disappeared out of nowhere. Everyone who watched that was completely horrified, and the protagonist just said he was out of time and started leaving there, and Izumi also looked at that without being able to show any reaction at all. Then after school, our big guy was reading a challenge letter from that annoying redhead and said that he would respond to that letter. After all, he could reduce the number of incidents in the future. And Luna said that he should go there and give that delinquent a good beating, so he would learn to never mess with the protagonist of a story again. That way, let's go to an arena that was right behind the academy. And the redhead asked what he had done earlier for his magic to disappear, but anyway, he just raised his hand saying that he would teach a good lesson now. He agreed with that duel but said he shouldn't bother him anymore if he won, and the redhead started laughing very loudly. After all, that would never happen. Leon raised his hand in a gesture calling the guy for a one-on-one, and the redhead got even more irritated, saying that now he was going to destroy him completely. But clearly the battle wasn't one against one. The other two delinquents rushed toward the protagonist, each one with a different type of attribute surrounding our protagonist, and the redhead shouted that it would never be a fair duel. After all, he was just a kid, and it's not like Leon was expecting a fair fight against that guy. Then he raised both hands toward those two delinquents using the mirror of negation. And at that same moment, it was as if those magics were reflected back at their attackers, and the two guys ended up flying to each side of the arena, and the redhead opened his mouth asking what was happening to have lost, but those types of sneaky traps he had already been through a lot, and he didn't plan to forgive anyone who attacked him in a cowardly way. While in his hands, those flames of darkness were spreading. The redhead was trembling because he didn't know what had happened to that boy, especially because the magic he was using didn't fall into the 4 basic elements. Then he questioned how that useless Kuro could use magic, but he was completely horrified by the protagonist's aura, because he answered that he wouldn't give any explanation to a scoundrel who wouldn't understand anything about magic. And the redhead raised his hand, summoning the fire magic, but even before he could strike, the protagonist merely brushed past him, lightly touching his shoulder, and that alone was enough for the redhead to completely lose his strength. He couldn't believe it, but his consciousness was fading away. Then he collapsed to the ground completely powerless, and Luna praised this power. After all, the dark attribute could also drain other people's mana, and the protagonist was satisfied. After all, those guys wouldn't bother him anymore, but suddenly they began to hear a loud noise all around. It was the sirens, signaling that an evacuation alert had begun because a gate was appearing near the academy, and this gate had an extremely high magic level. At the academy, all the students were running while the president was guiding them. One of the teachers stopped Izumi, saying she should leave as well. After all, the head of the academy had declared this portal to be of red category, and Izumi only stared back deeply, saying that long ago a red portal appeared in her neighborhood and completely destroyed the area. And that's exactly why she's been training at this academy to handle situations like this. So she herself would defeat this red portal, and in front of it several monsters were already emerging. And I wonder what the sirens are even for if the students were still standing there, right? They tried to fight those monsters with their magic, but they were background character spells, so obviously they didn't work. And the little wolves were charging toward the nearby students, but ice stakes were being driven into those monsters, and right behind them appeared Izumi, and everyone felt much safer when the student council president was there to help them. She asked if the other students were okay, and if so, they should get out of there immediately. She knew this place would be terrible to fight in. After all, they were close to the city, so they needed to defeat that portal as soon as possible. And she faced that monumental gate made of mana. Leon was far away watching that girl enter a red portal, and asked Luna what he needed to do to close one of those portals. And Luna replied that he needed to defeat the monster controlling the portal from the inside. Those same creatures were also known as bosses, but Luna warned him to be careful because, even though he possessed dark magic, it consumed a lot of mana. But the protagonist just stared ahead, saying that his actions were not driven by anyone else, but he couldn't ignore a situation where disaster was about to strike. And Luna saw the fist of our boy clenched tightly at that. She smiled slightly, knowing that this was exactly Leon's personality. Thus our boy simply leapt toward that portal, and inside Izumi was fighting against several monsters, and it was just as she expected from monsters of a red level. They were very strong, and right behind her, a giant snake-like creature was coming. She wouldn't be able to dodge it, and her eyes widened in shock. But at that same moment, several dark spikes pierced through that huge monster, and Izumi was completely terrified to see so much power unleashed at once, but she understood when she looked back. It was our protagonist arriving. The scene was overwhelmingly commanding, and just his gaze made everyone tremble with fear. She recognized Kuro and went to ask him what he was doing there. In fact, she first thanked him for saving her from that whole situation, and the protagonist simply said that he felt she needed help, but she still asked what kind of power that was, one she had never seen before. But instead of answering that, he just turned around and said that now they should prioritize closing this gate. So she just agreed, and they began to move through those dark caverns. And as Izumi had already heard about Kuro, during the academy battles he finished in last place. That's exactly why he was called a loser, and everyone challenged him. Then they started running deeper into the cave to find the boss, and the deeper they went, the larger and stronger the monsters became. I used a lot of water and ice magic and managed to stop the monsters, creating a water cyclone that trapped them all inside. That way they didn't waste time fighting smaller monsters, and the protagonist saw why she was called the best in the academy. Not many meters ahead, the ground began to shake, and from it emerged a gigantic golem with only one eye. And without any sign of greeting, it simply threw a punch toward the protagonist, who managed to dodge. Leon pointed his hand using the dark attribute once again, and created that same sharp spike of darkness that pierced through the golem. And Izumi watched all of it. She remained horrified. After all, this guy could destroy those monsters with just one hit. It was as if he knew how to exploit the monsters' weaknesses, but at the same time, that unique magic was very powerful. It was as if he were a veteran in both practical magic and real combat. Not far from there, they managed to see an entrance in the cave. Entrance or exit? Exit or entrance, because they were already inside the cave. If they enter, they'll leave. If they leave, they'll enter. I see, but the most important thing was that they were ready to fight the boss, and both of them stepped into that place. And deep inside, a gigantic red dragon was waiting for them. That same dragon stared directly at the two protagonists, and Izumi initially trembled because this was a lava dragon. The protagonist knew this monster. He had fought several in his past life, so he told her to get ready because it would start with a breath attack, and indeed that dragon unleashed a fiery blast toward the two of them. That same one completely exploded the area where they were. Right after, that tail came down violently and almost hit Izumi, destroying the entire place where she was as well. She only imitated the movements that Kuro had told her, and it worked. Then she used the ice spear toward the dragon, but her magic was completely shattered by the heat of that monster. It seemed that her ice magic was not effective against a Tefugo monster, but the protagonist was already at the flank of that creature, channeling his power as well. And several extremely sharp shadow claws came out from the ground. The dragon began to flap its wings before being caught and completely moved out of the protagonist's range. And Leon only said that this flying ability was really unfair, and Izumi did not expect a lava dragon to run away from them. The protagonist asked if by any chance the girl could use magic of other attributes, and if so, just for a moment, she should slow down that dragon. She understood what he wanted to do, so she agreed. That way she began to cast a wind elemental magic around her, pointed both hands toward that huge monster, then used the explosive gale and caused a vortex around the dragon, and the monster was being squeezed by all that wind around it. and the protagonist saw that it was at that moment that the dragon was completely still in midair. Then he locked his position while channeling even more dark elemental magic, and several black butterflies began to emerge from his power in a completely destructive and deadly trail. This was the skill of the rules of the abyss that were flying toward the dragon. Our hero snapped his fingers. At that very moment, all the butterflies began to react. They were shining so intensely that the dragon was almost blinded, but right after, they all exploded and caused a sea of destruction ahead. The protagonist extended his hand to protect Izumi from the debris that could come their way. Then seconds later, they saw that gigantic dragon already fallen, and Luna was celebrating while speaking to the protagonist mentally. The president of the council praised our boy a lot. After all, that power was formidable, and she had countless questions to ask, but for now they just gave a little fist bump saying that this battle was fantastic. That way the portal was completely dissipated, and the two came out safe and sound from inside. Outside, the monsters were beginning to turn into mana, but the two protagonists were surprised because a man said that the president of the council had disobeyed his orders. This was Shido, the director of the Imperial Academy. Luna quickly explained who he was to our boy. Shido was the one responsible for the foundation of the academy, and the one who trained the Seekers. The protagonist imagined that if this guy was the founder, he must have connections with that crest and consequently with Shark, but it was too early to assume anything. Meanwhile, the president of the council went to talk to the director, and he only retorted that she should not act out of a sense of justice, otherwise something could happen. It was easy to imagine what would have happened if by any chance she had failed with this portal. But the protagonist asked if it wouldn't be better to praise her instead of saying such rude words. But the director argued back, saying that outsiders should not speak about the academy's rules. And Izumi still said that they only managed to close that portal because of our hero, and the director was surprised, ordering them to explain everything properly, but quickly laughed, remembering the last place student in the academy, that damned Kuro. That was so ridiculous that he simply turned toward his car, and Izumi kept claiming that the one responsible for closing the portal was the protagonist, but the director could not believe that the academy's incompetent student had managed to close a red portal. Then he just left, screeching the tires of his luxury car. He didn't know that he should keep an eye on this guy, whether or not he had connections with Shark. Then, back at the dorms, our boy was finally ready to rest, and Luna did not like that damn director at all, and asked what he thought of Izumi. After all, she seemed very powerful, but at the same time, the protagonist was reading a little comic book. It seemed to be Kuro's old diary. After all, it was necessary to know more about this body, including those delinquents. He understood that while reading the words, Kuro was completely exhausted, both physically and mentally. And on the exact day the protagonist incarnated in this world, Kuro was already at his limit. He wanted to become a seeker to make money. After all, his sister was sick, but he had no magical talent at all to be a seeker. So he just locked himself in his room, completely oppressed by the others. All the students were extremely violent and bullied him. He even suffered various abuses inside the academy. Every single day was hell in his life, and the word that best described him was that he was frustrated with everything. And the protagonist remained silent for a while after reading the diary, and Luna asked if by any chance he was okay. While Leon went to the window to observe the moon, he wanted to show everyone what they deserve for messing with an innocent boy. That way, there in the director's office, he kept staring at Kuro's records. How did that failure dare to criticize him in front of the president of the council? And while holding his cigar, he thought of ways to expel him from the academy. And not many rooms away, the president was taking her bath, thinking that supposedly Kuro should be the last place in the academy, but all that power was not impossible. She was sure that he was hiding something, and that something greater was about to happen around Kuro. Then the next day, when the protagonist was going to his classroom, a person appeared asking for a moment. This was the vice president of the council. His name was Narus, and he had heard that he closed a portal yesterday with the president. He questioned if it was true or if he was just taking advantage of everything and looting inside the portal, because a guy with such insignificant skills as Kuro was someone who could cause trouble for the president, and the protagonist just replied that he was there to block that gate, and Narus complained. After all, the one who had never won a battle at school was trying to close a red gate. That was ridiculous. But right on the staircase, the president was arriving, and she immediately went to talk to our protagonist. After all, she was looking for him. Narus just turned his back, still keeping an eye on that big guy, and told the president they would have a meeting later. She even asked if by any chance Narus had caused any trouble, but the protagonist said it was nothing serious, like that guy was just a kid. But she was there because the academy's principal had summoned him, and upon entering the room, the principal immediately told our guy to give up. And Izumi shouted, "What was that about?" And the principal claimed it was simple. Kuro was simply too bad at everything. He had no magical abilities, nor was he good at combat. He threw the resume in front of the protagonist, saying that he had no future at all as a seeker. Our guy calmly picked that paper up from the floor, saying that basically the principal was asking him to prove himself. Then he stated that he would win every duel in the arena. That way he wouldn't be expelled anymore. The principal stared at him, asking if he was really sure about what he was doing. Then he took a look at the desk. There was the battle schedule, and the protagonist's next opponent would be Narus, and the principal liked that very much, saying that it was fine, he would allow it. Meanwhile, the protagonist just gave a little grin. After all, he doesn't lose any kind of bet. Then going to the student dorm, Luna was also looking at all those duel schedules, and the protagonist was staring intently at them because he remembered that on the way, the student council president had told him not to take this duel so he wouldn't get into any kind of trouble. She knows his abilities very well because of the last portal, but the vice president also had extremely high skills. The protagonist just thanked her for that concern but couldn't leave that challenge aside and simply walked away, already making his decision. But Luna asked if it wouldn't be more convenient for him to leave the school to research more. Only he replied no. After all, the emblem outside was from Shark, so he needed to investigate this place more deeply. Anyway, he had certain suspicions that the principal here had connections with another world too. It even crossed his mind that there was a possibility the principal had been possessed by Shark, but Luna couldn't see that because she had a sensitivity to people who also came from other worlds, and that's exactly why our guy would continue in this academy. He needed to stay here, but Luna made a somewhat sad face because even being the goddess's messenger, she couldn't guide Leon to a proper path now. Yet he just stood up and thanked her. After all, they gave him a second chance, and with that, he could continue his quest for revenge. Then he just turned to Luna, saying that she didn't need to apologize for anything at all, and the little lowly just smiled, because that was exactly what she expected from that great man. And for now, he would get ready for tomorrow's duel. And the girl shouted, saying that they had to show that principal who he was messing with. And she was really happy to be with Leon. She hoped that his goal would truly be achieved. I don't know if she realizes it, but his real goal is to take revenge on a former enemy from another world. So I think she's kind of crazy. But anyway, let's go to the arena the next day. The protagonist had to face several challengers, and the first would be that guy there, who was also red-haired, and everyone in the audience shouted that it would be easy to defeat the last place, and the protagonist just sighed. There was nothing to say to those idiots. Then that guy said he would use just one wind attack to finish everything, and threw a powerful blast toward the protagonist. And where is he? Leon had vanished from sight. So much so that this guy shouted that he had probably evaporated his enemy, but he was completely shocked when the protagonist's voice echoed right behind him. And our guy conjured the elemental magic of Earth, slamming a hammer strike right into that guy's stomach. And the guy just fell, flipped, was wiped out, went to take a nap, snored because he was already on the ground, totally done. The one who won the first challenge was Kuro, the last place, which was strange to the other students. How could the last place have defeated the 23rd? And the president just smiled. She knew his potential while Naruse was adjusting his glasses like villains do. And Luna realized that the protagonist wasn't going to use dark magic to fight those battles, since his individual skills with the elements were far superior to all those students. And in the next challenge, he also won with the stone hammer strike, and the opponent just fell stiff on the ground. It seemed easier. In the third match, he also won, and this time didn't even show what kind of power he used. And the principal, who was there in the office, was shouting that it was impossible for the incompetent last place to have won so many. There was no way he, the incompetent one, could have won that red portal or even those duels. Then someone knocked on the door, and he told them to come in, and it was Naruse. After all, the principal had called him there, and soon informed him that he would have to face that disgusting Kuro and should fight using his full strength, not showing a single drop of mercy. But Naruse replied that against that guy, it wouldn't be that necessary. During the duels, he had only used the earth element ability, therefore it wouldn't cause any kind of difficulty. And the principal just smiled, apologizing for making that request. He already knew Naruse was quite strong. Then the moment he left the room, he kept wondering why the principal himself was being so cautious with that boy. But anyway, he couldn't lose to a guy like that. And there in the arena, the protagonist had won once again, and it seemed he hadn't lost a single match. Even a little bottle of water as a gift had appeared. It was clearly Izumi who had delivered it, and Naruse was there from afar watching all of that, and it seemed a slight envy began to sprout in that big guy. Then by the end of that afternoon, the battle between our protagonist and Naruse began. The vice president said he didn't know what kind of trick that guy had used to win all the battles, and the protagonist replied that he had won. That's all, it wasn't a big deal, and he was also planning to win this one. Naruse then gave a little smirk, saying that Kuro had gotten a lot of courage out of nowhere. At that moment, everyone in the arena was glued to see how that battle would end. The protagonist just got ready because he saw that this guy also emanated great power. Suddenly, the entire arena fell silent. Naruse found it strange that the protagonist had been acting so different lately and began channeling electricity into his hands. Even so, it was ridiculous to look at Kuro's figure right in front of him. He was going to remove that mask, and with a smirk he created a kind of electric bow in his hands. It was a high-level magic, firing several arrows, and the protagonist stood still as they all went toward him, until he crouched down and placed his hands on the ground, summoning a gigantic stone wall. and Narusa's eyes widened because all his arrows just bounced off and got stuck there. It was as if the protagonist had managed to block all that powerful attack, which was strange, because the spell Narusa had used was a high-level one. The entire audience was horrified and left speechless, but Narusa still had to stay calm since that boy only knew how to use earth magic. He raised his hands too and began using high-level earth magic. When he lowered his hands, a rain of stones fell over our protagonist, who then raised one of his hands, summoning a wind spell and using explosive gusts to blow all the rocks away. And Narusa looked outraged at that. He believed that boy only knew how to use earth magic until now. And all the students around were shouting because that was incredible. Someone was managing to fight equally against the vice president. And Izumi also knew that few mages could use multiple attributes since it took a long time to master even a single one. But for him to be so good with so few attributes, and hide that for so long, surely Kuro was an incomparable person. Narusa believed that our guy could only use one kind of attribute, and the protagonist asked how long Narusa would keep his nose up above everyone else. And of course the guy didn't like that question at all, and the protagonist explained that he was simply someone who made hasty conclusions. He was arrogant and overconfident, had good magic, but was still an incompetent. And with those words, Narusa began to get irritated, saying that he wouldn't lose to the Academy's weakling. That was because he had trained a lot to stay by President Izumi's side. Then while channeling mana, he told the protagonist not to get cocky, because the two of them were not on equal footing. And in his hand, a great amount of mana was gathering. Everyone around shouted because that was the vice president's specialty, high-level water magic. Surely this was the end for Kuro. As Narusa raised his hands, the ground beneath the protagonist began to freeze, and a great icy wind surrounded our guy. And Narusa was confident because Kuro wouldn't be able to block all his power, in other words he would be frozen and thus defeated. But a kind of small flame began to ignite in the middle of that ice and Narusa's eyes widened at that. He didn't know what he was seeing in the middle of all that, and that gigantic crystal was completely shattered by the protagonist's flames. It was impossible how he could control 3 elements at once. And the protagonist simply apologized because he wasn't limited only by the attributes others believed, and he summoned a large ice crystal right above the vice president, and Narusa stared at it with a chilling gaze. The protagonist clenched his fists in an extremely violent motion, and that whole crystal exploded. Then a rain of ice crystals began to fall on the field. Those attacks were hitting around Narusa, and the vice president noticed that the boy could use 4 elements, and that barrage of attacks was relentless on the battlefield. And Narusa knew he wouldn't be able to win anymore, so he just opened his arms, already taking the rest of the attacks. Then he fell to his knees on the ground. The protagonist approached him, saying he would give him a tip for the future, that if he wanted to become the greatest of mages, he needed to keep his head up and focus on what he wanted to achieve. While remembering the orphanage, he mentioned that he shouldn't forget the people around him either, and Narusa was extremely irritated for losing that fight and asked who our protagonist truly was as he was already collapsing without strength. Then the protagonist just replied that he was someone who had many things to do in this world. In this way, Narusa lost the match while the teacher announced it. The winner was clearly our hero after such an incredible demonstration. That same night, the Academy's director was extremely irritated, saying that it was impossible. How could he use 4 elements at once? Maybe what Izumi told me that day was true, but honestly, Shido doesn't want to believe it. So he just stood up, calling our big guy a bastard while calling someone, because he definitely wants to expel Kuro from school. And so I think this director is kind of crazy, right? Because if I were the director of a school, I'd want a strong guy like that to keep protecting it. On the other side, the protagonist was thinking about what to do and Luna was there, passed out from sleep. He knew that by defeating Narusa he could stay at the academy for a while longer, but now he was unsure what kind of move he should make. It seems Shido ended up going on a business trip, so he started scribbling in his notebook. His mission now is to block the gates that appear in this world. This way he'll be able to find more connections. Somehow he knows these gates are connected to Belfar, and maybe he can capture him. The next day during class, a new teacher had just arrived, and the protagonist somehow managed to recognize him. It was Rashiba, and he even wrote his name on the board. He also said that he was a new teacher at the academy and hoped everyone would take good care of him. Clearly the girls around were in love with his looks, and the pro just stared at him, stared deeply because he felt something different about that guy. In the cafeteria, everyone was talking about the duels that happened yesterday. No one could believe the protagonist was really that powerful, and maybe it was worth asking him for a few tips. But right in front of our big guy, the student council president arrived, asking if she could sit there. She mentioned that he did very well during yesterday's battles. In fact, it was an extremely spectacular performance. But anyway, she also thanked him for the tips he gave Narusa. She felt that he had been a little frustrated lately. Maybe that defeat awakened him too. And in any case, Izumi couldn't forgive the director for putting so many battles on our protagonist. Shido is a former seeker, and lately we heard rumors that he was involved with dark connections. The protagonist asked what kind of connections those were, but before they could chat, a message appeared on the big screen saying that several portals had been appearing recently, and that those without magic power shouldn't get close to them. He remembered the words Luna said a long time ago, that in this world the portals started to appear much more frequently and the world was collapsing. This is the world that could find its end because of all the attacks that were happening. But the protagonist still had one one more question to ask the president. But before we could hear that conversation, we were taken to the night of that same day, and there was our protagonist patrolling around the academy. He made the right choice. After all, if a portal appears in the middle of the night, he'll be able to handle it with no problem. And it seems fate was on his side, because a green portal appeared right after. The big guy just went toward it, and when they entered, the location was the ocean of trees, a place he knew very well. And not long after, several monsters were already lying on the ground. Our big guy was truly relentless. Then they reached the deepest area of that forest, and Luna, even being a messenger of the goddess, couldn't sense anything there. But the pro looked back, and one of those monsters managed to grab Luna by the shoulder, pulling her far away as she stretched out her hand for help, being carried upward while the protagonist just watched. And right above, a kind of gargoyle opened its mouth. Luna screamed, completely terrified by that monster, saying she didn't want to be devoured by something so hideous and ugly. The protagonist just told Luna not to move while they were up in a tree. In that way, he raised his hands. He managed to use the attribute of dark magic, and several thorns began to emerge from the middle of that tree. Those same thorns were heading toward the back of that huge monster. However, the beast got scared by that surge of power and jumped upward. But it was already too late, because all the claws of the shadows managed to strike it. The monster was already completely pierced, while it released Luna in midair, and the creature just fell to the ground. Completely stiff, Luna ran into the protagonist's arms, thanking him for saving her and also praising how fast he was at casting those spells while they observed the monster's body. He just replied that it was out of instinct. He had fought for many years in the depths of hell, and Luna just smiled. And so I find it strange, because if I hear someone saying they fought in the depths of hell for many years, I'd be shocked, okay? I wouldn't be smiling like her. Then, minutes later, they managed to complete that green portal and return to the world. The protagonist needed to continue the patrol, but several stone stakes were flying toward him, and Leon jumped far away before being hit by those attacks and looked at who was launching them, questioning who he was, and a hooded figure appeared on top of a building. That person just laughed because it seemed our big guy's senses were really sharp. And that hooded figure, I'm not even gonna say it looks like the teacher from earlier, right? Compare the images. It's exactly the same, it's identical. Who does this guy think he's fooling, huh? But he just stared straight at our big guy. Leon told Luna to hide because that guy was very skilled. Then he questioned again why they were attacking in the middle of the night. And the man replied that he had no reason at all while conjuring flames in his hands and fired countless fireballs toward the protagonist, who once again had to dodge all those relentless attacks. The man was getting excited because those movements were extremely good, and he guided even more fireballs toward the protagonist. He kept increasing the number of fireballs until it became impossible for our big guy to escape. Leon conjured the darkness attribute and opened that devouring space, managing to swallow the spells. Every fireball on the field disappeared, and the man asked what had happened because the pro was completely unscathed. So what kind of magic was that? He could feel traces of darkness, but how could someone from this world use such magic? And around the man, black claws appeared once again and almost managed to hit him in a thunderous attack, but he escaped, though he still ended up taking a hit that cut a good part of his arm. The man knew it was not the right time to fight, so he threw a smoke bomb and vanished completely from sight. Luna reappeared right behind, asking if he was okay, and yes, he was, but that man was simply strange. Then heading to the dormitory, Luna asked why that guy attacked them out of nowhere, and the protagonist mentioned that maybe he was studying them first and that perhaps he had some connection with those people he was also looking for. Then he just stared at the glass, saying that he would capture him next time. The next day in the classroom, the teacher was there writing a few things on the board, and Leon kept staring fixedly until, upon leaving the room, someone called him too. It was the same teacher, greatly praising our protagonist, who had managed to evolve a lot in recent days. He had even heard that Leon had closed a red portal, and the teacher suddenly said that he believed in the protagonist. After all, he had shown incredible skill in the last duel and just smiled at the protagonist in a strange way, saying that he would be watching him in his next victories. But it was kind of obvious he wouldn't, because the guy just gave a sly little smile as he walked away. That same night, he was watching our big guy enter another portal once again. He was going to make Kuro pay for injuring him last time. So as soon as that portal was finished, and if he was off guard, he would attack him. There was even a scratch on his hand. And suddenly the protagonist came out of the portal, and the guy was completely shocked because how could someone clear a green portal so quickly, but it didn't matter because he would defeat him. Then he started calling on the radio. This time several hooded men appeared for the battle. The first one immediately conjured a fire spell along with the others, who cast several spells and exploded the place where the protagonist was. The man in the back was laughing loudly because it was disappointing. Then he turned on his radio again, but the people on the other side were screaming that they were in great pain, and this man once again looked out the window. It was not possible that the boy had survived that gigantic explosion. Then he tried to calm himself down because he was still hidden, but got a huge fright because right behind him, Kuro appeared and said that this ambush was pretty easy to escape from. The protagonist knew everything because he had sent Luna earlier to watch the surroundings. Then he quickly created a wind blade that completely destroyed the mask of that hooded man, and obviously it was Hashiba who was there. He had already noticed it in class. After all, even the arm he was using to write had changed, and it was precisely the arm that had been injured the night before. and days earlier he had asked the student council president to check the record of that teacher. It was said that Hashiba was a very famous seeker and that he specialized in tracking others. Then he just pointed his hands at his fake teacher, asking if they were going to settle this right here, right now in a one-on-one. Of course, Hashiba frowned and the protagonist asked why he had tried to attack from the shadows, but the guy just laughed. He looked like the Joker laughing at that moment by the window. But anyway, he just stared at our big guy, thinking that since he was just a student, it would be no trouble at all, and conjured a huge fireball. The entire building they were in started to burn. All the structure around melted and began to collapse around the protagonist. The man said he had used that same magic to defeat hundreds of thousands of monsters, and that the boy could consider it his grave now. Then he raised his hands and continued sending that huge fireball toward the protagonist. The protagonist calculated the power approaching, and joked that he knew that magic very well, the one the man was using, and held all that gigantic power with just one of his hands, and Hashiba couldn't find words. It was impossible to do that, and the protagonist returned the same fire attribute against his opponent and threw that same gigantic fireball at Hashiba. Clearly the teacher also counterattacked, and the two gigantic spells clashed in the middle of the building. A dense and gigantic explosion happened right there. And Hashiba just said that casting such a high-level magic was impossible for a boy like him, and the protagonist just replied that this magic was at most an intermediate ranking one. Of course the teacher stared at him seriously, saying that was something totally senseless. That magic was surely of the highest level. The protagonist said that unlike him, who had defeated only a few thousand monsters, he had defeated millions of monsters in the depths of hell. Then his hand slightly grabbed Hashiba's neck, and the man felt a suffocating pressure, a dark magic swirling around. He couldn't understand what kind of magic that was. It was completely draining his power. His body fell to the ground already without energy. The protagonist just stared at him with many questions in his mind. Then he grabbed the madman's head and asked who had ordered him to come and eliminate him. And the man rolled his eyes. He didn't want to admit it, just screamed that he had followed some instructions from another person higher in command. And the protagonist began connecting the dots. After all, this guy is invading the Sacred Academy. That means it was under Shido's orders, and he is probably on Belfar's side. He still has many doubts regarding Shido. Maybe he is the key to all of this. Then he stared at Hashiba to use this opportunity to reach Shido, and just tied the madman up there in the corner. He knows that the director will start to act more aggressively, so he needs to be more careful in his next moves, and that is exactly what he wants. He will expose Shido to the world and then finish him. Then he just walked through all that rain back to his dormitory. On the other side, a luxury car was heading toward a large mansion. The weather was really bad with thunder rumbling everywhere, and Shido arrived at that great mansion. Upon entering, he announced that it was him and even wore a crimson ring. The atmosphere inside that mansion was horrifying and grim. Shido could never get used to this place every time he came. Then someone ordered him to enter the room even before he could knock on the door. Inside, Shido presented himself with great respect to the figure in front of him. That figure was drinking some kind of wine in the middle of the night, and Shido reported everything that was happening around to this master. He asked if by any chance anything else interesting had happened. After all, he was curious about everything that could happen in this world, and Shido revealed that a student from his academy had completely changed in personality and results in recent days. Besides being able to control the four elements, his abilities and proficiencies were insane. That figure just sighed while Shido told him not to worry, because he would deal with that boy. He had already sent someone he trusted, and that figure just stood up saying he wanted to hear more about this story. And while watching those lightning bolts, he said that those sounds were extremely pleasing. A weak and foolish student who suddenly became very powerful. Shido said again not to worry because he had sent a very powerful seeker to handle that student. But that master asked if it wasn't strange that, until now, the one he sent had not made contact saying he had eliminated the student. Shido quickly grabbed his cell phone, but Hashiba couldn't answer because he was completely tied up. And Shido started to panic. Maybe that pathetic student from his academy had defeated his agent, and the master right in front said that his agent had failed. I didn't want to believe that. How could such a powerful agent lose like that? And the blonde man in front asked if it wasn't the right moment to use that method. Because if that guy really was such an incredible mage, perhaps his role as a student was just bait. Then he picked up a small box and Shido asked if he really had his master's permission to use that. And the madman threw something into the director's hands. He still thought it was too soon, but handed him a black ring. And Shido opened a big smile at that, saying that now he would get rid of that student and do what his master wished. Anyway, Shido just left while leaving the master there, and the blonde man just laughed while staring at the fire. It seemed that things were about to get even more interesting now, because it was time to reveal the black gate to the world, and he just burst into laughter. Thus the next day the protagonist was called into the director's office, and the man was apologizing for being rude in recent days, which was very strange. He just found it very odd that the boy had suddenly changed overnight, but Kuro had earned his respect since he had managed to change so much and become more powerful. He even said that he would start accompanying President Izumi to close portals, meaning he would take part in the Academy's most intensive patrols. The director simply extended his hand, saying saying that he was now fully trusting Kuro, and the protagonist also just shook his hand saying that he would fulfill his task. Of course, he knew that this director was planning something. While shaking the director's hand, he also channeled his dark mana into him, as if he were also planning something against the director. Outside, he soon told the president that this was a trap. That was because it was under the director's orders that Hashiba was sent to attack him the night before. Honestly, he still didn't know what the man was planning, but something bad was coming. Izumi looked quite worried, asking what they would do, and the protagonist revealed that he had a plan to make it happen, but this plan required that only he act alone. But he was surprised because Izumi said she would go along. She refused to let anyone be in danger, and Luna just said in the protagonist's mind that this girl really was very good. So the two of them set out at the end of that afternoon to begin the grand plan. In fact, at that moment they just had to do a patrol. And on the way, the protagonist asked if by any chance Izumi was afraid of monsters. And honestly, she wasn't gonna lie. Of course she was afraid to see those horrors, but either way, if she didn't confront them, innocent people would have to. And the protagonist was surprised by that answer, which was exactly what he thought too. The girl had determination in her veins. She wanted to become the greatest mage of all. She would do everything possible not to let innocent people and the children of the next generation have to fight. And those were exactly the words Kuro had said to the king that day. He knows that there is a long road ahead, but by observing Kuro in recent days, he is also becoming stronger and stronger. But that romantic talk was destroyed the moment a great gate appeared behind them. The protagonist's eyes widened because the mana emanating from inside was powerful. This portal did not have the usual color, and Izumi was completely shocked and sweating cold. She could not even move. Her heart was about to freeze. At that very moment, several claws grabbed and pulled Izumi into that black portal. The protagonist quickly threw his hand forward to reach her, but those claws were even faster and more merciless and dragged her away. The protagonist could feel a violent pressure coming from that black portal, but either way he had to save her, so he just clenched his fists and ran there. On the other side, the director was watching all of this on the big screens and was just laughing, because at that moment he would finally be able to eliminate Kuro. This was the main trap he had created for that cursed one. On the other side, the master could feel that the black gate had appeared. That was because the lord of that gate was a monster with extreme mana, and the protagonist was facing that gate, feeling that terrifying mana. Luna arrived right behind. She could also feel an immense power coming from inside. This gate was certainly much more dangerous than the red one, and the pro even understood that this was a trap from the director. After all, it made no sense for it to appear right on the first patrol. It seemed that this gate had been created directly by Shido. That also meant it was extremely dangerous. Luna pointed toward the gate because several monsters were coming out of it to attack our boy. At that moment, an arrow flew, hitting all those monsters directly in their heads. The monsters were quickly eliminated, and the one who caused this to happen was Naruse, and he immediately asked what the hell that gigantic and violent gate was. But when he found out that President Izumi had been dragged inside, he was desperate. However, more monsters were coming out of the portal to fight them. Naruse stated that he would stay there and fight all the monsters trying to come out. The protagonist thanked him immensely for that because things out here would also get bad. Then he just jumped toward that portal. Naruse was frustrated because he wanted to rescue the president, but he had to leave that guy to it because he was stronger. So he was fully trusting that student Kuro could do it and shouted at the monsters that he was now their opponent, starting to fire even more lightning arrows at all of them. And inside that portal, a completely devastated world could be seen. The protagonist asked if Luna could track the president there, but with so many monsters emanating gigantic mana, it was very difficult. All those monsters around had the power to be at least a boss from a normal portal, but that was not the problem. While he began channeling the darkness attribute, he created the Scythe of Calamity. Right in front of him, one of the dragons was almost striking the protagonist, but he ordered it to move. At that moment, the scythe completely tore that dragon apart. It was obliterated with such severe cuts that it quickly fell to the ground, causing devastation. The other dragons were also frightened watching that scene, and the protagonist just called them to fight because he was going to slice each one of them to pieces. On the other side, the director was watching Naruse protecting the portal but smiled because Kuro had entered that portal and would soon meet his end. And the protagonist managed to reach the deepest part of that world, a gigantic staircase. And Luna asked if our protagonist was okay because he had already fought a lot so far, and he replied that yes, after all, he had fought countless times, especially in the depths of hell, and Luna felt calmer hearing that. That way they had to rescue President Izumi and keep climbing that gigantic staircase. Up there, Izumi was quite dizzy and woke up completely wrapped in tentacles, and I don't even need to say what that looked like, and right behind her a gigantic eye was watching. Izumi could not destroy those tentacles or escape from there, and she felt that all her mana was being drained because of those tentacles, and she had never seen a monster of that level. That thing was strangely powerful, and she hoped at least that Kuro was safe and well, but she could not just depend on him coming to rescue her, so she would not give up. And she started channeling fire in her hands, but she was shocked because because that fire was having no effect, completely stunned. Then this monster would not be defeated with magic, and instead of eyes that creature opened a gigantic deep mouth, and Izumi was already expecting to be devoured, so much so that she closed her eyes. But at that same moment, one gigantic tentacle was cut in half by a violent blast. One of that monster's mouths was sliced by the scythe of our protagonist, and she looked at that extremely powerful weapon. And from afar the protagonist apologized because he had taken too long to come to the rescue, and the girl just gave a sincere smile. She knew this would happen. She knew he would not abandon her in that world. On the other side, the director was laughing because he had managed to make that portal appear without problems, and Kuro had met his end because it was impossible to defeat that creature inside. And the protagonist was face to face with that great monster, and Izumi was still there being completely drained, and Luna immediately warned that those tentacles were sucking mana. And the protagonist also found it strange because this monster he had not even encountered in his other world, but he could not be shocked or scared. He needs to defeat it while mana was appearing in his hands. But right ahead, a large sharp tentacle was approaching and he had to dodge before that huge impact. The protagonist stared at it, and the strength of that tentacle was ridiculous because it opened a hole in the ground. So if that hit his main body, things would get really bad. He used the dark magic around that monster, and several claws of darkness pierced directly into the body of that giant creature. But the protagonist knew it was not the end yet, because the main body of that beast was completely unharmed. But that monster screamed loudly because of the pain it suffered. Then several tentacles began to emerge from the ground, and the protagonist asked what was happening now. Until right behind our boy, one of those tentacle mouths appeared, and once again he had to dodge narrowly, but even so he was grazed on the face. He immediately shouted to resume that it was only a light attack and that he was fine. That grazing attack hurt a lot because it was managing to drain his mana, and now with those tentacles in the middle of the ground, the attacks were becoming quite unpredictable. Then once again he used his scythe to cut those tentacles, but they simply did not stop because many were hunting the protagonist, and he shredded them all with a single slash. Luna was worried because Leon had been fighting until now without resting, and judging by the state of Izumi, she did not have much time left, and the problems were getting even closer as he approached that main body. But the protagonist said there was no problem at all, and while dropping his scythe on the ground, he stated that next time he would definitely manage to defeat that giant monster. Using the magic of darkness, he propelled his body forward. Izumi just watched as he was getting closer little by little, and that gigantic monster kept counterattacking with several tentacles. The protagonist raised one of his hands, channeling the new power. He summoned that empty world that devoured everything, and each of the tentacles went in there and did not return anymore. That gigantic monster was trembling in fear when it saw that, and then it shrank, and the protagonist said he would do the same thing to it. He summoned several essences of dark magic right behind him, and fired the energy of infinity toward that huge creature, then jumped right in front of it. He was face to face with that gigantic monster and said that now it was the end for it. And in his hand he summoned all the remaining power of dark magic, and he used the great force of the void in an extremely powerful punch, and that same power began to spread throughout this monster, and his power of darkness began to annihilate it from the inside out. And that huge creature started to be destroyed to the point that it released Izumi in midair, and the girl, already without strength, just fell from above. And the protagonist, being the romantic he is, went there to rescue her, and managed to save her safe and sound. And little by little, the girl's eyes began to open, and she was truly happy because Kuro came to rescue her. At that moment, in the director's office, it was reported that the black portal was disappearing, and he was completely shocked at how they managed to close that portal, how they managed to defeat something that did not even exist in this world. But the director was not worried because he still had more rings. Then when putting on those rings, he opened a big smile because that way he would eradicate that boy, but he became completely terrified by a presence. Right behind, several shadows began to condense. That was the dark conversion that brought the protagonist directly to the director, and clearly Shidu was astonished, asking how he appeared there, and the protagonist just looked at him saying that he was an unforgivable person and that he would eliminate him as well. The director asked how he had found him there, and the answer was simple, because of that mark he had on his body. The director slowly realized that the shadow he saw earlier must have been that, and mentioned that he had never seen magic like this. Then what was he? The protagonist still had a very important question to ask. Who was behind all of this? It was possible to see through the cameras that he was there watching all the students of the academy. Why did he create this institute and now was doing such a thing? Shidu gave a slight laugh, saying that all of that was in order to create food. The food was the very students who were training, thinking they would stop the portals. While spreading his arms, he said that he himself was responsible for creating those portals. After all, he could gain advantages from all that chaos and obtain even more power and authority. The protagonist just lowered his head. Before such a selfish purpose, he was even ready to sacrifice Izumi. Now Leon knew exactly what kind of person the director was, and Shidu just laughed, saying that regardless of knowing him, he would be eliminated now. Then he projected a flame in his hands, saying that now he would meet his end, and ordered him to swallow all his power while throwing it toward the protagonist. And several fireballs were rushing toward our boy. But the image of the protagonist began to shatter right in front. That was because he created that devouring void, sucking in all that magic. That was also something unusual for the director, who had never seen anything like it, because all his power was completely destroyed. Then he was greatly startled because the protagonist's eyes truly belonged to someone with great experience in eliminating people. The director was completely terrified after his magic disappeared, but he looked closer at the boy. He was exhausted after entering that black portal, and since he was much older, more experienced, he would surely manage to defeat him. Channeling even more power in his hands, he began to continuously throw fire magic toward the protagonist, and stated that he was being quite gentle in eliminating him. Now all those spells were flying toward our protagonist once again, and the protagonist began to launch a Kamehameha, and Shido asked if he was not wrong because it was from another work that he was imitating a power, but in this case it was not a Kamehameha, it was a shield that denied all kinds of abilities and made them return to the attacker. And Shido's spells were returning to him, hitting him directly and sending him flying upward. And after a big impact on the wall, Shido was already on the ground. He was twitching after that fall and only said that it was impossible to lose to a boy like that. How could someone once called the most incompetent in the academy now have such an aura? How could he have such a terrifying look? The director began to lean on the computers. He needed to stay calm and summon a portal, but his hand was pierced by dark magic, and he screamed. Now he could no longer move that hand. The protagonist saw those rings and asked if they were responsible for materializing a gate. And the director was begging for forgiveness, while his eyes were already downcast, but he took a huge punch right in the face that made him fly even higher and fall to the ground. The director was practically unconscious and powerless until the protagonist lifted him by the collar, saying that there was no forgiveness for people of that level, and asked who he was working with to plan all of this, but the director felt an excruciating pain in his chest. Then suddenly he fell while calling for the master. The director was eliminated before the protagonist could even get answers. That was frustrating, but in a way, he knew it would not be so easy to get more answers. On the other side, the master was sad for losing someone so loyal, and while standing up said that the boy had won. He won, but only this time because it was not the end for them yet. Then going to the academy the next day, Izumi found it so strange that director Shido had returned to normal but without his memories, and the protagonist said that the authority that was over the director belonged to a very powerful person. Izumi said that the portals were still appearing on the other sides, and the protagonist replied that the director was not their main creator. He was angry because even so, he still needed to find the main person responsible for creating those portals in this world, and kept staring at the shark flag. Then that night, the pro was sleeping. In his dreams, Belfar appeared. That phrase, he said that it was not the end yet. Those memories kept haunting the memories of losing that girl from the orphanage, even being betrayed by Shark that day, and most importantly, being trapped in that deep hell. It was then that the protagonist woke up startled. It seemed to be that dream once again. Then he looked outside and the day was beginning. After all the events, Shido was still arrested, but the shark flag remained high on the mast. Now he was sure that Guy was the cause of all this, and while getting dressed, he just stated that he would get him no matter what. Then going to the academy, the students were seeing a guy passing by because his clothes were extremely flashy, and they told the protagonist that he was a new director around, and Izumi said that he wanted to meet our boy. After all, it was the protagonist who exposed the former director. Izumi already knew him. He was a great friend of her family, and had treated her very well since childhood. His name was Jenny Coleman. He had once been the instructor of one of the most prestigious magic academies. He was extremely skilled besides having records in closing portals, and Luna just whispered that it was because he still did not know our protagonist, and they were heading toward the director's office. Inside, they opened the door to introduce themselves, and Jenny immediately turned to our boy and opened a big smile along with his arms, saying that he had finally found him. And the protagonist did not expect that kind of reaction from the academy's director. Jenny had a huge smile. Besides being cheerful and flashy, he was nothing like what the protagonist expected. Even Luna started teasing him. The protagonist said that he already knew one thing or another about him, because he gave me some spoilers. The director also added that he came straight from the group called Saber. That was an institute where the greatest mages in the world gathered to fight against the portals. When they graduated from the institute, they could choose Saber to try to join. But in other words, he pointed to himself saying that he was one of the greatest mages, and started laughing alone, saying that he could recommend them to join Saber in the future. Yeah, it seems that guy likes to brag and talk about himself, and you know what else he likes? That you hit the like button, and also leave a comment about what you think of the story so far, right? Even Jenny is smiling happily there because you do that. Let's go. But at the end of it all, the director turned with a very serious word, saying that the world was changing with the appearance of portals in large numbers. And the protagonist already knew that well, and that he had gone out into the world to look for people to be part of Saber, people who had important roles and were very powerful in terms of magic. But one of the things that was bothering the powerful people in the world the most was the appearance of a black gate, and it seemed that not even the Saber Association could ignore something like that, and that was exactly why the director was sent to that institute. After all, the black portals now far surpassed the difficulty and danger of a red portal, because if the monsters that live inside them come out into the world, it will be a great catastrophe. So all those from Saber are on alert in case something like that happens again and they can act, and that is why he called the two. He needs their help to confront those black portals. Kuro has enough ability to conquer this portal, and he knows that because he received reports that saw the two coming out of the portal. According to the investigations, they assumed that Kuro had enough skill to join Saber. Then he looked at the protagonist while reaching out his hand, asking if he could lend his power to help this world. At that moment, the protagonist also greeted him, affirming that yes, he would help him confront those portals. Izumi still tried to explain that she was not the one who conquered that portal, it was Kuro who did everything alone. But at that moment, an alert was issued by the Academy, because a red-level portal had appeared, and the director was excited because it would be a good moment to see Kuro's abilities in action. And Izumi was worried because they were taking this matter too lightly, and the protagonist said he would leave whatever came out of the gate to the director. That way, the two protagonists went straight toward that great portal. Izumi was still worried and recovering from the last battle, and from behind, who appeared complaining that the two were going together, was Arnaros, who said that he would also accompany them. After all, they did not have many people left to confront this grand portal. The protagonist just gave a smile because that boy really seemed to want to improve. That way they entered the portal. Their mission now was to conquer this red portal. The moment they entered, this portal changed completely inside, and Luna asked if it was the first time the protagonist entered a portal with more people like that. He remembered the words of the director about using his power to conquer these portals, because it was the same phrase he used when he was a great mage in his former world. The people around him trusted greatly in his abilities and leadership as well. I couldn't fight alone and needed to create bonds with strong people in this world too. Working with Izumi and with Naros would be very good for his growth. That way the little trio began to run toward the depths of that place. It seemed to be a very deep cave with several nocturnal monsters, and the pro was going over the plan with them because ahead there were hundreds of monsters already waiting. And the plan was very simple, destroy all of them. And Izumi stated that she would take care of the wolf-type monsters first and already launched her ice crystals toward them. She managed to pierce each of the monsters in her direction, but missed one of the wolves that was going straight at her with its mouth open. But at that moment, dark magic overflowed into the environment and completely shattered that monster. And that was just a little finger shot from the protagonist, but he widened his eyes because a gigantic stone golem was around him with its hands ready to crush him. Then he yelled for Narus to aim at that golem's eyes. That was exactly what he did. He prepared a bow with 3 arrows and fired in such a smooth yet powerful way that they flew toward the monster, hitting directly that purple eye it had. That caused a sharp pain in the big monster that screamed and stepped back. Around the protagonist there were several bat-type monsters as well, and he just asked them not to worry because in his hands he was summoning the furious explosion of shadows, and the moment he activated it, he scattered all the monsters that were obliterated around him. The power of the shadows could inflict significant damage on each of those little monsters and they just fell to the ground. Yeah, that monster was kinda pathetic, and Luna was praising that the master was really doing very well. Izumi ended up apologizing for missing her attack, and Narus also apologized for being too slow in that shot, and the protagonist just praised them. After all, they didn't need to apologize, they were in this as a trio. And Narus asked what kind of magic he used. After all, he managed to wipe out so many monsters with a single attack, besides being very powerful, but had never seen that kind of magic before. It didn't seem like a type of power that could be found just anywhere, right? Izumi also said that she had seen this magic several times and was also very curious to know what it was. The protagonist in turn revealed that it was dark magic, a type of darkness attribute, and the two were astonished. He wouldn't go into details now, but that magic was powerful enough to nullify the effects of all others, and Narus wondered why he hid that ability during their fight and turned, saying that this was quite unfair to use. And Izumi believed that power was unbelievable. How much must he have trained to achieve something like that, while he sacrificed himself to reach the level he is at today? Maybe it was arrogance on her part, but one day she wanted to know his whole story. Then minutes later they reached the depths of this place with a gigantic ice dragon, and it seems that the creator of this place doesn't have much creativity, right? Because it's dragon here, dragon there, dragon everywhere. The protagonist knew the crystal dragon. In his world it was a formidable opponent, so he asked for support from the two behind him. They should aim at the legs of that monster, and then his two helpers completely understood the scene. The protagonist just prepared for a jump and started charging toward that dragon. And the crystal dragon soon set a target on our protagonist's head. And meanwhile back there the two were preparing an ice spell to the point it began to spread across the cave floor and trap the crystal dragon to the ground. At that exact moment, the protagonist was drawing from his dark world an exuberant and grand power to the point that he needed to jump to the ground, summoning the Scythe of Calamity toward his opponent. And with such a sharp attack, he completely cut off one of the arms and wings of that dragon. And this attack was more than enough to defeat the dragon completely, and Naruse was completely impressed to see so much power being used all at once. So this was the true strength of the darkness attribute. Minutes later, Jenny turned to the portal because the little trio had managed to conquer a red portal. He just said that the protagonist surpassed his expectations, and it seemed that outside, the director also managed to deal with several monsters. The director also praised that another person joined the little group inside, and the protagonist only said that he was essential for them to complete the mission. The director for a moment even forgot that they were students. After all, they managed to complete this portal so quickly. And the protagonist suggested the creation of a clan so they could close portals and asked to create his clan so it could have rights to enter portals without the need for higher intervention. The director did not quite understand, after all, what would this clan be, and the protagonist mentioned, since Saber's group is missing people, he will create a new group. The director became thoughtful for a brief moment because there were no precedents for creating a group with academy students so they could enter portals, but even so, it was very interesting. Then he told the protagonist to do whatever he desired. He did not need to worry about the other problems. With his authority, he would be able to make it work. So the protagonist just thanked the director and told his colleagues that they were now starting a new little group. That way, let's go to hours later in a new room. They questioned what was that thing Kuro took. It was nothing more than the map with all the portals he had closed in recent times, and Naruse could not believe that he managed to close all that alone, but recalled that in the news it appeared that the portals were being closed one after another without any explanation. Now Azumi understood everything. It was Kuro who did that alone, and they had to admit that it was truly impressive, but now that they were in the same group, they would do it together. That way the protagonist no longer needed to act alone, and while he was talking there with his new friends, Luna was on the side admiring everything and watching his growth. But Naras commented that their problem was not only the monsters when the portals appeared, and the protagonist knew it was the magical essence. That same essence made it possible for people to awaken magical powers, but for other people it was like poison, making them suffocate until they were eliminated. And as several portals were being born close to one another, this magical essence was increasing. At this moment, the protagonist needed to prevent this great disaster from happening. And then, going into that night, they began the first patrol of their clan. And Izumi looked around because those people there were allies of the director, they were mages from Saber. It seemed that Saber was in that area because the number of portals there was much greater, and they really looked like elite mages. The protagonist then frowned, saying that a portal had appeared. Seconds later, the radios of the two members there also went off, and they quickly said what they understood. Then the man turned to his partner and said that the portal had appeared less than 5 kilometers away. Thus the little group marked where they needed to go, and the three ran toward that direction. And getting near the portal, it was engulfed in flames. Many innocent people were running from there. In the middle of the way, a little child ended up falling, getting separated from her mother. And right behind, in a beautiful cliche, a big wolf was ready to devour her, and the child was already seeing her end with that huge wolf's mouth. But the hands of the protagonist closed, and shadow claws pierced that wolf, eliminating it instantly. That way the mother went to rescue her little daughter, and while hugging her, she thanked our protagonist very much. When they looked back, the Saber members had also arrived, and that little girl who had been saved before stared at the back of the protagonist, calling him amazing. She was admiring her new hero. Several mages were around protecting people and eliminating escaping monsters, but there was a problem because they could not get in touch with the internal cleanup team. The protagonist approached, asking if they were Saber members, and they immediately informed that they were members of the clan that had the director Jenny's permission. The man quickly recognized them. After all, that was the rumor the director had spread, and he soon informed them that there was a problem. It was because they had a specific team to enter the gates and clean them, but they had disappeared. Besides that, the communicators were not working in that area, and the team he led served precisely to clean the outside area and rescue civilians. They prioritized all rescues, and just behind it was clear they were really doing that. The protagonist just turned to his companions, and they all nodded. Then he said he would enter the portal to close it, but the man quickly shouted that it was very dangerous for students to go in there alone. But the director's laughter echoed around, saying not to worry because those were the students to whom he was entrusting the future. Besides, their talent was simply unbelievable, and together they could handle any type of portal that appeared. Inside they entered a kind of forest with a dense miasma. They could not see anything just a few steps ahead. Naras laughed, saying that now it would be their first challenge as a clan. The protagonist also gave a smile, and then they began that portal. The three soon ran to the deepest part of that place, but the monsters around had already fallen. Naras asked if it was not that cleanup team that had entered before them, and the protagonist replied that since they were taking too long and the communicators were not working, they had probably gotten lost up ahead. Azumi was quite calm now that she completely trusted her leader's abilities, but she could not rely only on him, she had to become stronger too. Naruse thought the same thing, he had to become more powerful to match the leader. So to be able to accompany Kuro in future missions, the two wanted to show even more of their powers. And there in the deep part there were several Saber members fighting against a kind of giant slime. Several of them were channeling fire magic, and it was a joint attack from 3 mages. And that giant slime received all that attack, but it seemed to be ineffective because the fire was extinguished right after, and several arms of that slime began to grow to heal itself. The leader of that group was nervous because that monster was not taking damage, and one of the members right behind mentioned that all of them should leave and abandon him there. But because of that distraction, the slime started to attack the group. The leader ordered everyone to raise defensive barriers, but they were quickly hit before the barrier could rise. The 3 were thrown into the air and managed to fall to the ground already unconscious. The boy in front mentioned that they were trying to protect, and that was why they were getting hit. They should leave, but as he turned around, those slime arms were approaching him. However, that purple power tore through the entire area, along with several elemental powers of fire and wind also cutting many of that monster's tentacles. The leader of the group turned to our protagonist, and the little trio arrived asking if they were members of Saber too. That man noticed that the 3 were wearing student uniforms, and Izumi went to evaluate that monster. It was a giant slime, and she told the others that the weak point was right in its core and stared seriously at that monster, ordering them to attack. That way she charged forward with speed, but the protagonist noticed a small slime growing there and shouted for Izumi to stop advancing. It was because right above her an attack was coming and that small mass of slime stuck to her hand. Naruse got worried and ran toward her, but he was also caught in a trap and his foot got stuck to the ground. Another attack was coming in Izumi's direction until the protagonist began reciting his spell and caused the evil explosion, completely destroying one of the arms of that giant slime, managing to save his 2 companions. Several explosions were happening on each arm of that slime, leaving it completely exposed, and the leader of that team could not believe in so much power like that. Then he just threw himself in front of his 2 companions, and while summoning his Scythe of Calamity, he stated that he would devour all of it, and with an extremely violent strike, pierced through the core of that slime, managing to defeat the boss of that portal. And the members of Saber could not believe so much power coming from that boy, but all they could do was celebrate that they were free now. And it seems that the protagonist's companions were quite incompetent, right? Moments later, when the portal went down, the leader was thanking the little group because thanks to them they managed to return safe and sound outside. The protagonist replied that it was nothing after all, they were also trying to save the people there, and the director ended up laughing loudly, saying that those really were excellent mages. And the leader of the group laughed as well, saying that he had misjudged them just for being students. That way everyone saluted the little group and also the future mages who would defend that country. And the protagonist just stayed silent while Izumi watched his back. On the other side, Luna was very happy because Leon had achieved a great accomplishment, but he only replied that the fact the members of Saber were safe and sound was more important. That was because our protagonist received an invitation to join Saber as soon as he graduated. But at that moment, someone started knocking on the door. Luna quickly disappeared while the protagonist went straight to the door to answer it. And who appeared there in the middle of the night was Izumi. She apologized for coming so late at night and even began to stutter while speaking and asked for just a small moment of the protagonist's time. And what she wanted to know was about learning more magic. She felt that she could not compare to the protagonist if she stayed at her current level. And it seemed that she was really serious. Maybe she felt incompetent after doing nothing that day. It was clear that she was completely uncomfortable accompanying him. After all, he was very powerful. That way he just said that yes, he would help. And the girl gave a big smile, thanking him deeply for that. In fact, in a way, she already expected that he would help her. Then they started immediately going up to the academy rooftop. But being nosy, Naruse also showed up. He wanted to watch it and join the battles. It seemed that Naruse had also sought out the protagonist earlier to learn magic from him, and that would be very good for the protagonist to teach both at once. But anyway, the two turned to their new teacher asking for tips, and the protagonist just put on a serious face, saying that he would teach them very well. Then he spent the first part of the night explaining several things about magic, that they first needed to perfect the basics as much as possible before moving on. But anyway, first they needed to correct the bad habits they had, and both of them were quite frightened. And Izumi, for example, in the middle of battle, used to run ahead of everyone to attack first, and she really always did that, only she didn't notice. The girl had great hyper-focus and created blind spots where she couldn't protect herself, and for Naruse, he didn't foresee anything that was going to happen, he only reacted. And the big guy didn't understand that very well. After all, predicting something was really difficult, and the protagonist replied that the most important part of fighting was preparation. First, for example, when Izumi was in danger, he quickly ran to save her and also got caught in the trap. Naruse did that because he was frustrated that day, especially in the battle they had. He could easily get distracted by the students around him. In other words, now that they knew their flaws, they needed to fix them little by little. That way the protagonist snapped his fingers and summoned a shadow wolf. He also just said that it was a recreation of what he saw in the portal, so it wasn't dangerous, but they also needed to escape from it while fighting. That way he ordered the shadow wolf to attack those two. They were training their abilities and also the bad habits they had. Naruse at one point asked if they wouldn't have a break time. That was because morning was already approaching, meaning they had spent the whole night there. But even so, they were still watching Izumi fight and she didn't stop. and Naru said that maybe she was doing that because of her position as the student council president, and explained that she came from a very prestigious family that produced extremely powerful mages. In other words, eventually she will need to go to the front lines and fight against evil. So, probably from now on she's trying to take on all the responsibilities around her, and now that phrase she said made sense. I wanted to protect the future, so that was the reason she fought so much, and because of her personality she didn't listen to others, so she would do anything to become stronger. Luckily Kuro arrived at the right time, so he also apologized for what happened that day during the duels. He just overdid it, and the protagonist felt that this guy really wanted to be very honest. That way they continued their training afterward, and far away the director was watching that little trio. Then in that way the month passed and we go inside a portal. The trio was running toward a gigantic monster. The protagonist ordered what they had to do that way, and he jumped toward that monster while projecting his Scythe of Calamity and managed to cut 2 of that monster's arms at once. Down below, the 2 companions were running toward the flank of that giant, and the monster had a super ridiculous regeneration ability to the point that its arm managed to grow back. A few seconds later, it quickly threw a punch where the dynamic duo was, but they jumped up and immediately activated their magic. Naruse used the electric shot, and Izumi used the ice crystals once again, and those attacks were much more powerful and faster than before, managing to hit the monster from both sides, and it had no reaction at all, falling to the ground already defeated. It seems that their training had a great effect, so much that they even did a super cliché team fist bump, and on the other side, the one who was watching all that was that blonde guy. Still, he praised that those 3 seemed to be good mages. But anyway, his experiment will be complete soon, as he watched a completely crimson field, and he was more than eager to meet that student who suddenly changed, called Kuro. And let me tell you, I think that blonde guy can only be that cursed prince who threw our protagonist down to the depths of hell, huh? So, who do you guys think it is? So if you liked everything that happened in our story here, and also want to know what will come in the future, smash the like button, click to subscribe, activate that famous bell, and of course don't forget to comment a lot because that helps the channel grow a lot. And just because I'm a really nice person, I'm gonna recommend 2 more videos here from the channel for you. That said, a big kiss and hug. See you in the next video.